My personal framework is I always start with the data. And the reason I like to start with the data is because there are so many problems that affect like 0.1% of users. I keep a little database for my stakeholders, especially my stakeholders who are going to comment on my potential promotion or performance review or 360 feedback. If it's not an important area, if your talents don't align and you can't build a learning loop due to the people around you, it's probably not a good focus area for you. 50% of what you're shipping doesn't work. That's actually a really good percentage. But if 95% of what you're shipping doesn't work, that's a really bad percentage. Thinking through, is it execution, is the first bucket that you can kind of easily look at just based on those percentage of issues that failed. When I was an early product leader, like when I first became a director of product, we would do so well on strategy and execution, but we missed that we were focused on the wrong part of the growth equation, that we weren't making a substantive enough impact. I imagine what you're seeing at ISB, and certainly what I saw at Wharton, is people aspiring to be billionaires, people aspiring to create the next world-changing company, people aspiring to set up the next big venture capital firm. And as a PM, you need to just be okay with that there's always going to be people who don't like the decisions, and do they matter? And were they right? And if not, be happy with the decisions you took.
Welcome back to the episode, Aakash. In the last episode, we talked about how to build product management careers in AI. And today, I want to talk to you about core product management practices and your Wharton MBA journey. So let's start with the podcast, and super excited to see how this conversation goes. Let's shift gears now. Let's talk about core product management. We've learned this from many newsletter, courses, and mentors that how important it is to find the right problem or consumer behavior to leverage to build the right solution. In my previous job as well, whenever someone came up to me with a solution on a problem, the actual problem was layers within what they mentioned before. The consumer behavior that we wanted to leverage changed, and therefore the solution changed. So what is your framework to find the right problem, the right metric, and build the right product? How do you tackle this?
Yeah, well put. This is probably, if we go back to our taxonomy, this is like, top 75% PM skill, where the bottom 25% of PMs, they can't conquer this skill set, but all of the top 75%, they have their own takes and approach around this, but I'll give kind of my personalized flavor of this. So the first thing I like to do is really nail that conversation with the person. You want them to feel super heard. So you're telling me that the problem is this. So you're telling me the solution could be this. You believe this solution could be that because of this experience and this data that you have. If you use those three phrases where you're creating alignment with them on the problem, solution, and why they chose a particular solution that they're trying to push you down, they feel heard. And then often reply to them 24 hours later with this written up. This is the problem, solution, and why that we talked about. Then it's about actually doing the work to figure out what the real problem underlying everything is. And my personal framework is I always start with the data. And the reason I like to start with the data is because there are so many problems that affect like 0.1% of users. And that's kind of the most defensible way to go back to that person afterwards and say, okay, we're not going to work on that. And so I would like to see like how many people have this problem and how many people is it truly affecting? How many people, when they open the app tomorrow, are going to face this problem? And when you go look at the data, there are very few problems that are going to be affecting a lot of people. So you use the data first. Now, if the data does show that, hey, this problem is affecting a lot of people, that's when I like to dig deeper first from a first principles point of view. Like, I'm always talking to customers. I'm building the product myself. I should have a very deep understanding. So I want to, from a first principles perspective, understand a problem. So let's take a very specific example so I can make this more concrete for people. a specific solution that someone came to me with when I was at Apollo, which is a software to help salespeople do outbound sales. So like cold emails to book meetings for selling a software, for instance. A specific solution that someone said we really needed to do was we needed to make it really easy to make sure that your email doesn't land up in spam. Very cool. So now I need to apply my own first principles thinking around this problem. I've looked at the data and 20% of our emails are landing up in spam. So this is a big problem. Now I'm applying my first principles understanding. What I want to do is I want to say like, what is the job to be done of the user? The user is to get the email responded to. Spam is not helping that. On top of that, spam could help prevent what emails from the future from being delivered. So from my first principles understanding, this is a very, very important problem. Now that person also came with me with a solution. They said we should cap the number of emails, cold emails you can send to 25 per day. Now I did have alignment on the problem. Do I have alignment on the solution? That's where you want to go investigate deeper. Want to go look at what competitors are doing to prevent spam. Want to go look at the actual how Google and Outlook work in terms of marking as spam and hurting deliverability, and does the number of outbound emails impact it? Want to go look at our customers' data and see of people who are landing in spam more or less, how many sends is it impacting it? So I use all of these data sources, competitive data sources, first principles, and also just the data on spam from my other customers. And what I learn is, gosh, I have people who are not landing in spam who are sending 100 a day. So it turns out that we don't have solution alignment, but we do have problem alignment. And 9 out of 10 cases, this will be what happens. After you generate problem alignment, they don't have the right solution. And so then you need to go through and you need to encourage the stakeholder, which you update them. You say, hey, don't think this is the right solution for X and Y, Z reasons. But then they're going to say, well, what is the right solution? And then we may not know the answer right away. You might say, hey, we probably need to spend a quarter or a half, investigating, doing design sprints, shipping out little MVPs to slowly chip away at this 20% spam rate. So maybe, the alignment at the end of the day is we need to get from 20% emails sent to spam to 10% emails sent to spam. And we're not exactly sure what solutions will drive it. We have some hypotheses, we see that our competitors are doing things like X, Y, and Z, and we have some ideas around A, B, and C from customer interviews. So that's my personal approach, is to really bring the stakeholder along. And what I tend to find is that your junior PMs, they understand this in theory, but when it actually comes to implementing this, they get lost along the way because there's so many other tasks to do. There's so many other stakeholders to bring along. And so often what I like to do is I keep like a little personal CRM. A CRM is a customer relationship management software, which salespeople use, where they track, these are my companies, these are my leads, this is the status of the lead. I keep a little database for my stakeholders, especially my stakeholders who are going to comment on my potential promotion or performance review or 360 feedback. And then I keep a database of them so that I know that Cindy out in product marketing is a big fan of reducing spam. So then when I do some work on spam and I almost forget to include Cindy in the meeting, or I forget to include Cindy in the email update, I can go back to my CRM and I can say, okay, who's everybody who's really interested in the spam work that we're doing? Cindy was really, really interested in it. So we've just shipped a little MVP on the feature. I'm going to include her in the feature results email. So that's my personal process.
I really love this tactical advice of managing a CRM, especially when you're working in a startup where the processes are not set. There's so many stakeholders and there are multiple projects that you're working simultaneously. It's difficult to switch your context and miss the task. So thank you so much for that. Let's now talk about product growth for a few minutes. Product growth can mean different things for different companies. Few days back, I was listening to Archie, who is the VP of Growth and Revenue at Shopify. and he mentioned this on Lenny's, that how at Shopify, growth does not mean reducing churn and increasing retention, but it means increasing collective GMV from a cohort of sellers onboarded in a year. So, how do you think a mid or junior level PM in his or her company can define the right goal, the right metric, and the right growth roadmap for their own company?
So Shopify has done a really good job of that. And if you break down what they've done there, there's probably three important ingredients that you can kind of take as the recipe for defining your own version. Number one, they've focused in on a very specific area. There's too many times where growth, it ends up becoming ARR or revenue. It's like, okay, I guess we'll just do everything, but isn't every other product team, every other marketing team, every other sales team also influencing this? How can we have proper OKRs or KPIs around the final output metric? It's too difficult to do that. And so you need to build, first of all, a growth model, ideally with some equations. ARR, for instance, it's equal to the number of sellers that we have on our platform times the GMV per seller times the take rate we get from those sellers. And so number of sellers on the platform, we've decided at Shopify, that's not a growth team concern. That'll be other core product teams and marketing teams and sales teams. Now, GMV we get from those sellers, that's what we're going to give to the growth team. We're not going to give them the take rate because the take rate will be somebody else, maybe the pricing teams. And so now the growth team has a focus area. They're not accountable for something that they can't influence. It's an area where they have some locus of control because it's some specified part. So that's the thing. But now what specified part do you choose? You want to choose a part that has a lot of leverage, where if we increase this, it won't just help the business now, it'll help the business in the future as well. Also, an area that we can actually influence. There are so many times that a growth team is given a metric, and then some core product teams actually own the key levers to identify, change that metric. You're in a totally messed up space if that's the case. So you want to then finally have big features, not little optimizations, not testing 25 shades of blue, but big feature hypotheses or solutions that you can build to move that metric. So you need to hit these three conditions to create a space within the business based on the growth model or growth equation that you should work on. So that's number one. Number two is you need to create a focus area that aligns with the talents of your team. So what might happen is that your team, let's say your team is a bunch of back-end engineers, then it's going to be very, very hard for you to make changes to the front-end process of what a seller experience is like and their tracker of how much GMV they're running through Shopify and different elements like that. So then that would be a bad metric for you. You need to build. As a junior PM, you might not have necessarily the influence to say, hey, these are the engineers and these are the designers we need. So you need to choose a focus area that matches your skill set, that also matches the importance and the leveraged area and the good ideas that we're talking about. So what I would say is just based on these first two filtering criteria, and I haven't even gotten to the third one yet, you need to have a lot of ideas about potential areas. And you also need to have the product sense to be able to play through. Here are some solutions, whether the solutions would require what types of talent, what product surface areas those solutions would potentially be executed upon, whether or not the team that's owning that product surface area is even open to you working on it. I've had cases in a firm where the product surface areas that are going to be most impactful for the particular metric I've been assigned, that team is not open to even collaborating with me on it. Then you need to X that out. That shouldn't be the focus area. And then the final and most important thing is, are you guys going to be able to own a learning loop around this? So, and what I mean by owning a learning loop is you're going to be able to ship features say whether they worked, ship more features along this particular area or ship more features along another particular area. If you're in some part of the business that sales, for instance, has all the say, like on the take rate, for instance, and you're trying to optimize the take rate, the problem is that sales is going to ultimately come in and override you a lot of the times. And so your learning loop is going to be broken. Or if you're in the very core part of the business that the CEO cares the most about, then they may just come in and override you. So if it's not an important area, if your talents don't align and you can't build a learning loop due to the people around you, it's probably not a good focus area for you.
I have another question on this learning loop. Sometimes there's so many stakeholders involved in the product team, or there's so many ways to come to this product equation that it might be wrong, or you might not be going into the right direction. So when do you decide that you should stop this learning loop? And how do you identify whether the equation was wrong or whether the strategy or execution was incorrect? How do you identify these?
That's actually one of the hardest parts. So it's a really phenomenal question, which is, how do we understand whether it's the equation, whether it's the strategy, or whether it's the execution? So the first thing I would think about is, let's take a look at what we have shipped in the past, and let's try to apply our product sense against what we have shipped. So you take a look at the things that you've shipped. As we know, more than 50% of what we ship doesn't work. So then you specifically take an eye on those whatever percentage of things that didn't work. And first you say, well, how big is this percentage? Is it 95% or is it 50%? Because if 50% of what you're shipping doesn't work, that's actually a really good percentage. But if 95% of what you're shipping doesn't work, that's a really bad percentage. So you're taking a look at the percentage of things, then you're trying to understand what drove that percentage. And if it is the case that the features do look like they were built well, they were built in the right design systems, they were prototype tested, you did user discovery to make sure that you were solving important problems, then it's probably not an execution issue. But if you go look at those features that didn't work and there were 4 bugs, there were a lot of user experience challenges with the issue, we never tested the prototype, then it's probably an execution issue. And so thinking through, is it execution, is the first bucket that you can kind of easily look at just based on those percentage of issues that failed. The second is, if your percentage is really high, let's say 80%, of your features are failing, then you really need to go into the growth equation and the strategy. And usually when the percentage is high, it actually means that it's your strategy, that the strategic problems that you've identified are not the right ones. And then finally, if you seem to be having a decent percentage of features succeeding, 50% of features are succeeding, and you look at the 50% that don't, and there are no obvious issues with execution, then it's probably not strategy or equation, it's the growth model. Because you're driving good features, they're succeeding, but they're just not moving the business impact enough. And let me tell you, not enough teams focus on problem one. So I'm so happy that you mentioned problem one. Even myself, as I reflect back on some of my mistakes, especially when I was an early product leader, like when I first became a director of product, we would do so well on strategy and execution, but we missed that we were focused on the wrong part of the growth equation, that we weren't making a substantive enough impact. So it was a really good question that you asked, and more people should consider that problem.
Interesting. Thank you so much for this incredible answer. Let's talk about your Wharton journey now. You have to reflect a little. But before joining Wharton, you were a PM, and you were a PM after graduating as well. So why did you decide to do an MBA, and why Wharton in particular?
Yeah, so if you think about my personal longer career arc, I went to the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, which is like one of the top 5 public universities in the US, but it's not like a top 5 university period in the United States. And as we all know, to crack those top jobs, those FANG jobs, those Google jobs, also those top VP jobs, people like those very tippity top brand names. And so for me, when I was a product manager and I decided, okay, I'm going to study for the GMAT because the GMAT is a lot of work, especially getting a 750. It took me hundreds of hours of preparation to get to that level. I said, hey, I'm only going to apply to the top 3 schools. So I actually only applied to Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton because I didn't want to be in this weird place where like I get accepted to U Chicago or I get accepted somewhere, basically out in an Indian context outside of ISB and IIT. I didn't apply anywhere else. I said, I'm only going to apply to these 2 because if I get into Masters Union, I might want to go there. So I'm not even going to apply, right? And I'm just going to go to these top schools. And it was because I wanted to generate this tippity top brand because ultimately for me, I knew that like, I was having trouble cracking interviews at Fang, even though I was a director of product. I was having trouble getting, all the things I wanted to do in my career, even being considered for some promotions. And I go look at the profile of other people. Oh, Harvard undergrad, this and that. And so I said to myself, okay, I want to crack into the tippity top. And so that for me was one of the big motivations for even doing it. And then once I got in, I didn't just blindly accept. Actually, I tried to ask a lot of my mentors, both within product management, but also within the company I was at. I was at this company called ThreadUp, which I really admired the CEO and the president. So I talked to them and what do you know? Both of them had MBAs from Harvard and both of them said like, if you get into Harvard, Stanford, or Wharton, you just got to go, the returns often the returns don't happen in the first 5 to 10 years. The returns happen in the next 25 to 45 years. And I just thought about that and I said, okay. And then on top of that, as we all know, the MBA compared to work, it's kind of a joke. Like you work, but you don't have to work that much. Wharton doesn't even share your GPA with people. And so I knew I could have a lot of fun over those 2 years as well, while helping me get a tippity top brand on my resume. At the time, Wharton was ranked #1 in US News World Report MBA schools. And so for me, after listening to my mentors, after talking to all these people, and also just thinking about wanting to have 2 years of fun, I decided to do it.
Do you think in hindsight, what an MBA was worth it for you?
Probably not. I mean, yet. So I'm only like, less than 10 years out of it. So I think that maybe I haven't hit the ROI as everybody was saying. But if you think about it, I was a director of product. I could have probably become like a senior director or VP even if I had just stayed at that company. So I would have been earning a lot of money. I stopped earning and I decided to pay the University of Pennsylvania for 2 years. On top of that, when I was a director of product, people were always pinging me for director of product jobs. When I was an MBA student, literally nobody wanted to hire me for a director of product job. In fact, I had to take a lead product manager job out of MBA. And so I had to take a huge level down in that period as well. So I would say that, no, definitely not. I wouldn't recommend it if people want what I want. I think I tell this to a lot of product managers in general. If you're already a product manager, you already have the best credential to become the next product manager. And so if I really wanted to break into Fang, a better approach for me probably would have been to work my way up in terms of quality of company. So I was working at ThreadUp. It was like, let's say, a $1 billion company. If I wanted to work at a $1 trillion company, I should have moved up to a $10 billion company and then a $100 billion company. Then I could have moved up into a $1 trillion company. Now, interestingly enough, I did get a PM job at Google out of MBA. So I was lucky enough to get that PM job at a big company. But again, it was actually of the regular title, senior product manager. So going from director of product to senior product manager, or I could have taken this other route, where as a director of product, I eventually made my way to a director of product at Google. And so for me, I think in the PM path and in the content creation path, those are basically years I wasn't a PM. It didn't help me that much. Now, where it did help me, I think, is in ambition. Personally, I don't know if you feel this way, but I hadn't been around people quite as ambitious. As a PM, you're spending your time with software engineers who are highly paid and are happy being software engineers, designers who are happy being designers. Your fellow PMs, you barely spend any time with them, but all of them, all they want to do is get promoted again. I imagine what you're seeing at ISB, and certainly what I saw at Wharton, is people aspiring to be billionaires, people aspiring to create the next world-changing company, people aspiring to set up the next big venture capital firm. And so it did improve my aperture for ambition, where as before the MBA, I think, becoming a VP of product at a unicorn, that was like all I ever wanted to do. Post MBA, it was like, no, I actually... they make us do a lot of these exercises too, where they're like, wake up 20 years in the future, what type of house are you in? What do you look at? And I was like, yeah, I do want to wake up on a house on the beach in Malibu, California with a ton of light and have my own team and control my own schedule and have my own hours. And so it actually opened up my aperture to what I'm doing now, which is, again, becoming a founder, becoming a content creator, and being much closer to that path.
Couldn't agree more. At ISB as well, and even when I was doing my applications, when I talked to many of the ISB, Kellogg, Wharton alumni, I realized how big their ambitions were and how much I can get from an MBA. But at the same time, truth be told, product management recruitments are difficult after coming to a B school. So yeah, that's incredibly true. Now let's move to the final part of the podcast, a rapid fire. I'll ask you some 4 questions and you can just answer that one by one. First question is, what are you reading currently and what's your go-to podcast?
I read and podcast a lot, guys. So I can't go through everything I read and listen to, but I would say my top 3 sources of information these days. Number one thing I'm reading kind of every time it hits my inbox, of course, is anything from Lenny, both newsletter and podcast wise. I think he has such a high quality bar. He's not sending anything to my inbox that is a waste of my time. And so I really love reading everything from Lenny. The second area that I'm doing a lot of reading in is I've highly curated my LinkedIn feed. I only comment things that are really, really good. So if I were to open up my LinkedIn feed right now, it would be some product management post, followed by another really good growth post, followed by another really good tech post. And I would probably like all 3 of them. Like that's the quality, that's how curated I have curated my feed. And by the way, people always ask me like, how is your feed so curated? Here's the sad truth, y'all. You are not engaging enough with content. The algorithm needs signal. You need to give it likes. You need to also, I hide a lot of posts. A lot of times I say, I don't want to see any more from this author. I often unfollow people. In fact, for every 10 unfollows, I probably do 5 unfollows. So 10 follows, 5 unfollows. Every day, probably. I'm doing that. So I'm giving the algorithm so much signal, but I'm getting a really, really good algorithmic feed on LinkedIn, and the same is true of Twitter. So I'm reading both those social media sources. And then the third is I actually do a lot of Substack newsletters. So for me, I'm a big fan of Powell Hearn writes The Product Compass, David Pereira writes Untrapping Product Teams, Gergelia Rose writes Pragmatic Engineer. I can't always open my inbox for all of these guys' newsletters because I'm subscribed to like 40 newsletters. But Substack does a really good job if I open up their app in the tiles that I see at the very top, what articles to read. It does a really good job of picking out the articles from all of those 40 newsletters I'm subscribed to and surfacing those good articles to me. So those are the top 3 things I'm reading these days. Kind of cliched because there's a lot of social media and Lenny in there, but very helpful for me at least. And then podcast wise, these days I'm trying to create like the world's best podcast. That's my goal, right? So I'm trying to watch all of the best podcasts out there. And so in India, Beer Biceps, Ranveer's podcast, really, it's the top podcast in India. In the UK, Diary of CEO, Stephen Bartlett's podcast, it's the top podcast in the UK. And in the US, although Joe Rogan is the top podcast, he's not exactly the vibe I'm going for. I'm going more for a modern wisdom vibe. So I watch and listen to modern wisdom.
I think you have written around 88 case studies till now. This was in your New Year's reflection post. How do you keep yourself updated with so much of research, case studies, tools, etc. What's your source of learning? Is it the same as the reading list you mentioned before?
So I would say like my most important product is my content calendar, which is what I write about. So I'm obsessed about looking at the data, getting user feedback on my content calendar. So what I do is after any given post, I'm looking at how many likes, how many shares, how many views, how did it rank in SEO, and most importantly for me, how many paid subscribers did I get? How many paid unsubscribes did I get? And so the most important metric for me is typically like net paid subscribers. So I'm looking at my net paid subscribers from a data point of view. And then from a input point of view, I take at least 2 calls with readers, or I try to take 2 calls with readers a day. And I actually classified this podcast appearance as a call because you're a reader. And so that's why it made it onto my calendar, is because I want to learn from my readers. What questions are they asking? What topics matter to them? What's interesting to them? Basically, every question you asked me today could become a future newsletter article topic. Then I'm filing that in my brain about my own product sense around what Arushi and similar people to Arushi care about. And so I'm constantly refining my content calendar, and my content calendar is built out almost 3 months in advance. So if you look at right today, I have 2 newsletter deep dives a week planned out for the next 3 months. Now, of course, these will change because there will be timely topics that come up. Some of these topics, I'll get more data that, hey, my net paid subscribers isn't so good on this topic. Let's cut it out. Or my net paid subscriber is so good on this type of topic. I need to add more in that realm. So it'll change, but I have my content calendar already ready for the next 3 months. So I already in my mind know, okay, these are the 24 articles I'm going to be writing. So these are the things I want to develop my understanding and my knowledge about. And so I will then start to sculpt my questions with users and with readers. I will start to sculpt the type of content I like on social media. I'll start to sculpt all of these information sources so that for a piece coming out in March, for instance, one of the pieces that's coming out in March is like the Amazon PM interview guide. Anybody I know who has interviewed at Amazon, I'll just ask them a couple questions about it. Or anybody I meet who's working at Amazon. Yesterday I was just out with dinner with my family, and one of the people on the table, he happened to be working at Amazon. I would just pepper him with questions about what it's like to be at Amazon, what it's like. He's not a PM, he's a researcher, but how the PMs he works with are experiencing life. And so I'm slowly building out this long tail of research so that when I go to finally write the piece in March, I have a bunch of information ready. And for every given piece that I write, I personally have a bar. Which my bar is my wife is an academic. She would never publish something if there was never something new. So I always want to bring something new to the product world. So I want to do some sort of original research. And so that's how I'm thinking about it, is maybe I talk to 3 people who just recently interviewed at Amazon. Now I have some new information to share with the world. Then I'll go ahead and publish it.
Wow. So much discipline and determination in that sentence. Inspiring. A lot of people are planning to apply to Wharton MBA in the coming years. What is that one Wharton tradition that not many people know of and you enjoy the most?
Yeah, so at Wharton, I forget the name of this activity, but basically on Thursdays, there's like this giant happy hour. And interestingly, Wharton class is 900 people. So you can go 2 years in the program and not meet all 900 people. But I wanted to meet more of them. And so they had this cool tradition. You have to pay for it. Surprisingly, only like 60% of the class pays for it. I don't know why 100% of the class doesn't, but I highly recommend you pay for it. Where on Thursdays at like 5 o'clock in this cool hall in downtown Philadelphia, they have drinks. And personally for me, like there was no reason to ever drink alcohol at 5 p.m. because, I would have meetings and workouts and different things to do, but I would still show up to that dang event. And, while everybody else is drinking, I'd just have a beer in my hand. Maybe I'd have like one sip, but I would get to meet people. I would get to connect with people. I'd get to be with the crowd who is going to it. I think it's called like Wharton Pub or something like that. So that was my favorite Wharton tradition.
Last question. what is the best career advice that you have ever received?
So when I was working at Epic Games, I had a director who I reported into, and I was reviewing. It was like I was leaving Epic Games, and I was just reviewing like how my few years at the company did, and we were just having a fun chat together. Funny enough, we were playing Fortnite while we did it because we said, "Hey, it's like the going away chat. Let's just chat and play Fortnite." And I was talking about some of my failures and some of the things, and I said, like, "Hey, like this person wasn't happy with me pushing forward these roadmap items, and this person wasn't happy with these features." And he said, "Yeah, but do they matter? And were you right?" And he just snapped me out to say, like, yes, of course. A lot of people, they're not going to be happy with the decisions you take, the product decisions you take. But did you incorporate the input from the people who do matter? And as he was implying there, like, yes, of course, they weren't happy with it, but they don't matter, right? Like, as a PM, you need to just be okay with that there's always going to be people who don't like the decisions, and do they matter? And were they right? And if not, be happy with the decisions you took.
Now, with this comes the end of the podcast. Thank you so much, Aakash, for coming in and doing this. I personally have learned so much here from all the tactical lessons and learnings you have given here. And I hope the audience also have learned something from it. And you especially enjoyed recording this. Thank you so much for doing this again, and have a very good day.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me and having me on, and hope it helps some people.
Thank you so much.